let's jump into this content about ghosting. It's an interesting problem that we seem to have. And, I hear different opinions on ghosting, on why certain customers ghost you. So, for example, when customers don't show up, that's what we mean by ghosting. So, here's the big question. What can you do to avoid being ghosted by a prospect? In other words, somebody who's potentially going to buy. Now, let me set this up because we got to frame the conversation. And if you've never heard the phrase ghosting, I define it as simply saying I made an appointment with the prospect, and when the meeting came, the prospect never showed up, maybe never showed up for a Zoom call or a demo, right? That means you've been ghosted. Now, when we talk about ghosting, there's so many aspects of ghosting, but there's too much to cover this evening in this Sales After Dark episode. I'm going to give you about maybe 10, 15 minutes of content, and then again, I'll answer some questions at the end. So when we look at ghosting, I asked myself, why do people ghost you? Why don't they show up? Let's say they said they were going to be at a demo, right? You schedule a demo, they don't show up. Why? I thought about this and I go, well, there's several reasons why people ghost you, right? Maybe they didn't want to disappoint you. That may be right, In other words, they may have decided not to buy. They're going to say, they just don't want to disappoint you. The other one is, some people just hate to explain why they may have, for example, changed their mind. Happens, people change their mind all the time. Maybe some people, they just don't like confrontation, right? In other words, they don't want to call you and tell you, hey, I'm really not interested in your product, so they just want to avoid confrontation, right? Some people are just passive aggressive, don't want to deal with it. The last one I would say is probably some type of anxiety, right? In other words, there's fear. There's a reason they don't want to meet with you, right? In many cases, it could be just themselves. When I talk about ghosting, people always say, well, Victor, one of the reasons people ghost you, in general, if you're the seller, is because you provided no value, right? That may be true, but let's just say that I didn't even get a chance to talk to the prospect and they just simply ghosted me after they set the appointment. Many cases, especially in today's market, there's so many options out there that customers are overwhelmed with choices or options. In many cases, they lack the confidence in themselves to make a buying decision. So they say, you know what, I'm just not going to make a decision. In other words, instead of making a decision and then maybe being wrong, they rather not make a decision and just kind of leave it at that. And so there's lots of reasons. And I'm going to create a course in the Sales Velocity Academy about ghosting. But today I just want to cover the psychological aspect, things you can do, something tangible you can do to reduce being ghosted, okay? Now, as you know, if you followed me, everything that has to do with sales influence, all about behavioral economics, I love to understand why people do the things they do. What's the psychology and how can I leverage the psychology? So I asked myself the question for this. How can I use, psychology, right? Behavioral economics to kind of get people maybe to show up more often than not. In other words, what tips or strategies could we implement to help us increase the show-up rate and not get ghosted as much? Again, there's no way I can help you eliminate ghosting altogether, but if I can help you increase a couple of percentage points, I think that would be worth your time. So let's get into the presentation here. And what I want to do now is talk about a study. This is a fascinating study. I want you to imagine for a moment that when people say things, right, there's something called the rule of consistency. And I first came across this when I read Dr. Cialdini's book, Influence. By the way, if you've never read the book Influence by Dr. Robert Cialdini, I highly recommend it. In there, they talk about the rule of consistency. And let's talk about it. I'm going to simplify it. The rule of consistency states this. When you verbalize a commitment, in other words, you verbalize it, you make it public, you are more likely to follow through. This is important. Psychologically, this is important. If I verbalize, in other words, if I say it out loud, if I verbally commit to something, I'm more likely to follow through. Keep that in mind. I'll come back to that. Now, if you don't follow through, you feel what they call cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is that feeling that, you just don't feel good about what you've done. In other words, you feel crappy about yourself. Let me give you an example. Let's say You asked me, and let's say in this case, I'll say Doug Lehman. Doug Lehman comes up to me and says, Victor, in a month, I'm moving. I need somebody to help me move my stuff. Could you help me? Would you help me? And I say, Doug, yes, I will, right? I make the verbal commitment, yes, I will, Doug. Doug takes that to the bank. He's going to depend on me, right? Now, as time goes on and the date draws near, I'm thinking, oh, that's right. On this date, I have to help Doug move. And we've all been in that situation where you made a commitment, you verbalized, you said you were going to go or you were going to do it. And then all of a sudden, as that date approaches, it's like, I really don't want to go. I really don't have time to help somebody like Doug move, right? I love Doug, but I don't have time. You know what I mean? In your mind, you try to get out of it, right? And let's say that you bend your morals and you come up with some lame excuse, right? When in your mind it's a good excuse, but some lame excuse of why. In this case, why I can't help Doug. I come up with some excuse. I say, Doug, I stubbed my toe. Oh, sorry, I can't help you, right? Now, I hang up, and how do you think I feel after hanging up? That moment, how do you think I feel? I probably feel horrible. First of all, because I lied, right? I may have stubbed my toe, but I could have really helped him, right? That is that feeling you have when you made a commitment and then you don't follow through is called cognitive dissonance. In other words, your actions don't match what you committed to. So keep that in mind. That's cognitive dissonance. And what we try to do is when we feel cognitive dissonance, we try to rationalize to kind of bring it in alignment, so to speak. In other words, I can say to myself, no, I mean, really, my toe did hurt, and I would just make it worse by helping Doug. So you know what? I'm justified in not helping Doug move. Again, we rationalize these things to kind of get rid of that dissonance, that guilty feeling we have. So the point here is that once you verbalize something, you're compelled to follow through, because if you don't, you're going to feel bad about yourself. Keep that in mind, because that's what we're going to leverage. Now, here's an example I want you to look at. Let me go here. Sorry about that. Now, they did a study in a restaurant, right? And one of the problems they were having is that people were making reservations, but then not showing up, right? There were no-shows. They were ghosting people, so to speak, right? So what they thought about was this. They were always saying, they would tell people, look, if you make a reservation, please call us, right? If you're going to cancel or change your reservation. In other words, hey, please call us if you're going to change your mind. Thank you. That's what they say. And again, they still had a lot of cancellation, ghosting, right? But then look what they did. Instead of making a statement, because that's what this is, a statement, they said, well, let's phrase it as a question. And they asked the question, will you, key phrase here, please call us if you're going to cancel or change your reservation. And then you pause and wait for a response. You pause and wait for a response. And what you're waiting for is a verbal commitment, like, yes, I will call. So in other words, I will say, will you call if you're going to change or cancel your reservation? Pause. They're going to go, yes. Now, on their side, they've made that verbal commitment. Much like I'm going to help Doug move, they've made a verbal commitment. Now, if they decide not to show up, they're going to have that cognitive dissonance, right? Because they agreed that they would call. And what they found is by simply going from a statement to a question, they had an 18% reduction. Again, not perfect, but they got an 18% reduction. Let's call it 20% reduction in cancellation rates. In other words, no-shows rather. So in other words, it improved it by 20%. Now, that's not bad, but let's kind of go to another example. Here's another study. I find this one fascinating. They did a blood drive. We always want people to donate blood, right? So they did almost the same thing. Again, we'll put you on the list as coming. Thank you. That was a statement they made, right? Then they said, let's change it a little bit. We'll put you on the list as coming, okay? In other words, okay, like, is that okay? And then you had to actually give them the verbal confirmation, and they would say thank you. And they went from 70 to an 82% show-up rate. In other words, that's an additional 12%. So in other words, if 70% is 7 out of 10 people, now they're getting 8 out of 10 people, and maybe just a tad better. So in other words, they got an extra person to show up for every 10 people. That's not bad. If you can get that type of improvement, that makes a big difference. Let me show you what I mean, because you're probably looking at those numbers and says, well, okay, 10%, Victor, but what's the big deal? It's a big deal. For example, let's say you're with a SaaS company. And let's say you use the same thing, but let's change the verbiage a little bit. You'll say, please call us if you're going to cancel or need to change the time for the demo. But you would change it to what? This right here. Will you please call? Now, don't put email, call, right? If you're going to cancel or change the time for the demo, wait for the confirmation. Now, think about it this way. If you're able to get an improvement, in this case, for example, in the restaurant business, you got an 18% improvement. That's 2 additional people. But let's be conservative. Let's be conservative, because let's talk money, right? Let's talk money and how ghosting can make us money. Let's go to this. I ran these numbers for you. Because initially you'll look at this and go, yeah, what's the big deal? 10%, Victor, not a big deal. It's a big deal. So we had the example of 70% for the blood drive going to 82, which is 7, and then now 8 out of 10. In other words, you're getting 1 extra person showing up. But now think about this. Let's run some numbers, hypothetical numbers, right? That means if I'm doing a lot of scheduling per day and I can recover, in other words, get 1 more person to show up per day, just 1 person. If I do, let's say, 10 demos a day and I get 1 extra person to show up, that's great. That means in a month, 22 more or less working days, that's 22 extra demos that I get to do in a month. Let's say that my close rate is 40%. So 22 extra demos, 40% close rate, that means I just closed 8 extra sales that month. If I multiply that by 12, that's 96 extra deals per year. And let's say that it's $1,000 each sale. That means that's $96,000. And let's say that each customer that I bring on board has a customer lifetime value over 3 years of that much. In other words, this stuff begins to add up. So let me go through it slowly again. If I can just get 1 extra person to show for a demo per day, right? That's 22 people in 1 month. Times 12, if I convert, and then times 12, I get extra 8 sales per month. Not bad. Again, 96 extra sales per year. You can go through the numbers. So this makes a difference. So by simply using this strategy of will you show up and getting them to verbally commit, if we believe the restaurant data, if we believe the blood drive data, simply asking a question, not making a statement, will you call me if you're going to cancel or need to change the time for the demo, can make all the difference in the world. Think about your business. If you can get 1 extra person to show up to your meetings, right, or demo, what would that mean to your business? Run your own numbers. And again, it's fascinating when you look at it from this perspective. Another way of looking at it is like this. I like to run numbers once in a while. So, year 1, I, again, generated an extra $96,000 in sales. Now, this is recurring revenue for a SaaS model, right? That means every time I bring on a customer, they stay with me for 3 years. So that's 96,000 for that 1 customer that stays with me for 3 years, right? But then, again, if I were to repeat this process every year and just continue to bring people on board in 1 extra time, you can see that the revenues start really stacking up. So again, I know it's a quick way of looking at numbers, but you get the idea that the more people we can bring on board, that 1 extra person per day, 22 per month, and if it's recurring revenue or there's a customer lifetime value associated with it, and the customer stays with you for 3 years, that's revenue that begins to stack as the year goes on. So that was one strategy. Again, simply just using that, will you call me, if you're going to cancel or change your reservation. The person says yes. Again, increase in actual show up. Here's one more strategy I want to share with you. This one also has some data associated with it. This one was fascinating because, so tip number 2 is that you send a confirmation 1 to 2 days prior to the actual meeting or presentation. And what they found is fascinating. Whether it's email, text, or phone, again, everything, it depends on how you do it. But they would send something like this. We're looking forward to the demo. on this date, this time. Please let us know if your plans change. So again, what they found is simply by using this confirmation. So again, it's kind of a 1-2 punch, right? We get the will you call me, right? And then you get the confirmation via email or text, right? Just remind him, or phone call, you leave a voicemail. And all of a sudden, again, depending on how you do it, whether it's email, text, or phone, your show up rate increases by 20-30%. So think about this, just these two simple strategies. One, will you get a verbal commitment? Because again, once people say they're going to show up and they verbalize that, they have a hard time not doing that. Again, they feel that cognitive dissonance. Strategy number 2, if you follow up with an email, phone call, or text 1 or 2 days before, you can have an improvement in your show up rate. So just those 2 strategies can help you reduce the amount of ghosting you're currently experiencing. And last but not least, let me just remind you of what this is and why this works. Let me erase this right here. Again, when you verbalize a commitment, you are more likely to follow through. That's what we're leveraging. That's what we're leveraging. That if you can get them to say yes, and again, I got it within the Sales Velocity Academy, there's a course called Blocking Objections where I talk about the psychology of why this works. For those of you who have not been in the academy, by the way, we're running a Sales After Dark special. There's the website. There's the discount code, SAD40, Sales After Dark 40. You get a 40% discount off the Sales Velocity Academy. And that is all I have for you